He's the darling of the Tory faithful, but is Boris Johnson the man to save his party from doom? In the race to succeed Theresa May, Conservative MPs narrowing down the finalists to Johnson and his successor as Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt, who edged out Michael Gove, the Environment Secretary, and eliminated him. So what does BoJo really stand for now? Is he the charismatic former journalist who, as a Conservative, got himself elected twice mayor of left-leaning London? Or the Boris Johnson who was reviled by Remainers for picking his camp on Brexit, seemingly out of political calculation rather than conviction? Is he the man now to unite a party that just suffered an historic defeat in European elections, finishing in single digits? Can he reconcile a bitterly divided Conservative Party and a bitterly divided United Kingdom? Yes, it's not just the Conservatives, by the way. The opposition Labour Party also on the brink over Brexit. And it may be about more than just that one issue, as the confused wrangling proves at a Brussels summit that's also taking place to fill top jobs at the EU. The political maps being redrawn, not just in the UK, but all across the continent. Today in the France 24 debate, could BoJo be, well, the last of the Tory prime ministers? Joining us, Jeremy Stubbs, president of the British Conservatives in Paris. Thank you for being with us.
Good evening.
From London, Conservative Party member and campaigner Shabnam Nassimi is with us. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
He always helps us make sense of where British political opinion is going. From Edinburgh, John Curtis, who teaches at the University of Strathclyde. Welcome back.
You're welcome.
And in his latest documentary, Wait and See, independent filmmaker Simon Koss spoke to fishermen on both sides of the channel about Brexit. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. 2 final rounds of voting among MPs in the Commons. And now we're down to 2 finalists. Those 2 finalists who are Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt.
Michael Gove, 75. Jeremy Hunt, 77. Boris Johnson, 160. We therefore declare that Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson are going forward to a vote of the qualifying membership of the Conservative and Unionist Party. Thank you very much.
So, Jeremy Stubbs, that 2-vote margin triggering some spontaneous oohs from the MPs there.
Yes, that was the only touch of drama about this. I mean, we imagined it was going to be Boris Johnson way in the lead and Jeremy Hunt next. The surprise was Michael Gove catching up to within just a couple of votes.
Because in the penultimate round, Gove finished second. Why are you so convinced that it would be Hunt?
Well, I'm referring to the long-term prognostic, and this is exactly matched this. In a sense, Michael Gove is always hampered by his association with 2 things: his association with the referendum campaign, which Remainers don't like, and his association, very close association, with Theresa May's operation, which Leavers don't like. So he's always going to be in a bit of difficulty, and I think that's probably what scuppered him in the end. But he came close, which is quite a triumph for him in a way.
John Curtis, the penultimate round, Boris Johnson picking up the support of 157 MPs. For the last round, he only got 3 more. What does that tell you?
Well, basically it tells you that Boris Johnson has managed to acquire the support of just over half of the Conservative Parliamentary Party. But then we should also bear in mind that he's not managed to win over the other half. And to that extent, at least, although there is no doubt he's the odds-on favourite to win this contest, because polls of the general membership indicate that Boris Johnson is the most popular candidate by far. And it doesn't matter which of the many different candidates that he was pitted against. That was always seeming to be the case. But that indeed he will have something of a job on his hands to bring the Conservative Parliamentary Party together, let alone the Conservative Party in general, because although the MPs have had 5 chances to vote for him, it's still only just over half of them who've ended up supporting him. So it's an indication that, yes, he's the front runner, but is he the person who all MPs are necessarily going to be happy with? Not necessarily.
Shabnam Nassimi, your reaction to the result?
Well, I think it goes to show that Boris is the ascent to leadership as Prime Minister is the unstoppable candidate, and I think he is the candidate that will revive the Conservative Party, unite the country, and win back off Farage Tories. I think in the current climate, in complex case of Brexit, he is the only candidate with a vision, with determination to get Brexit delivered by the 31st of October, and clearly the faith and the trust of over half of the Conservative MPs is with him. So it seems like we will be having Boris Johnson as the next Prime Minister of the UK.
And will you be voting for
him? In the beginning, I mean, first of all, I'd like to say that we were lucky enough to have a very talented and broad candidate base for the leadership campaign, who brought up new campaign styles of engaging the British public, of listening, of really getting the feel of where Britain is going. So even though there were candidates that didn't get enough votes, it has changed the climate of how we engage in British politics. With Boris, I left it to last minute in terms of who I was going to support, but through a lot of discussion, through my own research on his style of politics, on his vision, on his manifesto, I am quite positive that Boris will be the candidate that I'll be voting for, and many others. I think that his vision when it comes to getting Brexit delivered by the 31st of October is the attraction. Unfortunately, we are living in very uncertain territory when it comes to the future of Britain. But the only way to bring back our community together, the UK together, is by delivering on the referendum and ensuring that we leave the European Union by the 31st of October.
Jeremy Stubbs, just to be clear, most Conservatives here in France were Remainers before the 2016
That is true, the majority.
vote.
Not all of them, but the majority, yes.
So how will you be voting, and how do you think many of the Conservatives in France will be voting?
It'll be actually fairly divided. You know, if you think that all ex-Remainers will necessarily be voting for Jeremy Hunt, it's not necessarily the case. People are trying to think, who is the person who will get us out of this situation, the situation we're all in? And to be honest, I think it's so difficult to get out of that people are ready to turn in almost any direction. Boris Johnson has a lot going for him.
It depends on the campaign, is what you're saying? That because there's still a few weeks before people actually...
It might do, but I don't think overall that's going to change the eventual outcome. And I think most people have decided that if it is Boris Johnson, they're going to support him. They're going to hope that he can bring something off. They don't know if he really can, but they're going to hope, and they're going to support him, I think.
And you personally?
I will support him, but I'll wait and see what he does, because he's never been a predictable man in the past.
Yeah, Boris Johnson promising that come what may, the UK will leave the European Union by October the 31st, as was planned.
None of us wants a no-deal outcome. We don't want a disorderly Brexit, which is what you're talking about. It is very, very important, however, to prepare for that eventuality. It is responsible to do that.
So, Simon Cos, if I understand that correctly, we don't want a disorderly Brexit, but if it comes to that, that's what we'll get.
Well, that's what Boris Johnson's saying, yeah. I mean, I think obviously the real question afterwards will be not so much what happens within the Conservative Party, but at the level of the country, whether or not that's really what the people want. There's clearly a strong feeling that people are fed up with this thing going on for as long as it has. But the country is still very clearly divided. over Brexit. And whoever is elected the Prime Minister, and I'm certainly not in a position to, I'm not an expert like the other people in the panel today who know much more about the internal politics of the Conservative Party. That's absolutely not what I know about. But quite clearly, whoever is the next Prime Minister is going to have to deal with bringing this country back together.
You say you're not an expert. Do you find yourself having to explain it to French people?
Yeah, with difficulty. I mean, I just come across a lot of amusement, really, when I try to explain what's going on in the UK to French people quite often. Quite often because I find it quite confusing myself sometimes. But what seems clear is there are two very different points of view and very clearly and honestly held points of view about what it means to be a UK national in 2019 that have emerged through this whole Brexit drama, if you like, and the question is how to bring those two groups of people back together, and that's a really difficult question, and I'm not sure leaving on the 31st or not leaving on the 31st, that's not going to be the end of it. I mean, I think that's clear, but that's the way I see it anyway.
John Curtis, certainly Boris Johnson, one of the UK's best known, if not the best known politician at this point in time. The fact that he has this ebullient personality, is that an asset or when you look at your polling numbers?
Oh, there's no doubt. Basically, Boris Johnson has two crucial assets in this election. The first is indeed he is not only widely known, but he's popular. He's regarded as both as being as likable and also as determined, somebody who those on the Leave side of the argument think will deliver Brexit. He doesn't score quite so well on trustworthiness, but overall there is no doubt he's popular, widely known, and just liked. He manages to appeal very widely to the electorate in a way that none of the other of his competitors did. None of the other competitors had anything like the same reach, and the same is true of Jeremy Hunt. But he's got a second crucial asset because he's Boris Johnson, who was the best-known face of the Leave campaign in 2016. And there is a feeling amongst Conservative members that he will deliver Brexit that he didn't even think that they associate with Michael Gove, let alone Jeremy Hunt, and that indeed, remember that around 2/3 of Conservative members are in favour of leaving without a deal if necessary, and the fact that Boris Johnson has, for the time being itself, allied himself with that cause is undoubtedly a crucial asset. But this is an asset that has its limitations. I mean, you've set out a variety of things that he might want to do. One is to unite his party. Another is to rescue the party from its currently electoral difficulties. And Boris Johnson's assets certainly leave him well placed to do that. But another one you set out was to unite the country. Well, Boris Johnson, I'm afraid, is not very well placed to do that. He's now a deeply polarizing figure. All of his reach within the wider electorate, all of the people who say they might switch to the Conservatives if Boris Johnson becomes the Conservative leader, they are all entirely on the Leave side of the argument. And amongst Remainers, Boris Johnson is actually one of the least popular of the candidates that's available. So uniting the country is going to be very difficult. And then, of course, that does leave the even bigger question of whether actually he will be able to leave the European Union by October the 31st, about which, shall we simply say, amongst the commentariat, there is widespread scepticism.
Widespread scepticism. And Shabnam Nassimi, before getting in that Brexit bus in 2016, Boris Johnson really waited till the 11th hour before choosing his camp. And that's what's stoked all this resentment towards him. His former editor at the Daily Telegraph once said he wouldn't trust him to tell him whether it was Monday or Tuesday. In view of that, he may energize the Conservative Party, but can he unite the country?
I think he can. I think we need to focus more on what he's done and less on things he may have said. His record as the Mayor of London, winning 2 consecutive elections, and as a result of Mayor of London building affordable housing, knife crime had fallen, as well as taxes, and a number of other achievements in a city that's incredibly diverse, one of the most diverse cities in the world, a Remain city such as London, and very much a stronghold Labour city. He had won 2 elections. The public's trust were based on his achievements as mayor, and he has a proven track record of delivering on what he stands for. He has vision, he has determination, and the key, I guess, here is that people are backing him mainly because he's the only candidate that's firm, believes in Britain, believes that we can have a global future and a secure future, trading with the rest of the world, partnering with the global world outside of the EU. And I think a task such as Brexit, one of the most difficult and challenging tasks any government has ever undertaken, a peacetime government, you need a visionary prime minister, someone that has complete faith.
You heard John Curtis say that according to polling numbers, he's a polarizing figure and that he's not trusted outside of the Conservative Party.
That's understandable, of course. I mean, the Conservative Party has become very divisive over the last couple of years, particularly because of Brexit. We have British politics has become divisive for the British public, divisive between Leave and Remain, between different groups of people, diverse, gender, etc. So I understandably understand that that picking Boris Johnson as the next leader of the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister of Britain can seem risky, but in such a situation, like I said, he can be an asset. He has proven to deliver on what he believes in. He has a vision, and it's about dictating those visions and ensuring that we get outcomes for them.
All right, we'll give his rival a second look when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at Boris Johnson as the overwhelming favorite to be the next Prime Minister of England. This after it was whittled down to 2 finalists by members of Parliament who will face off. We'll have results by the 3rd week in July for who gets to lead the Tories between him and his successor as Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt. Talking about it with us, Jeremy Stubbs, president of the British Conservatives in Paris, from London, Conservative Party member and campaigner. Shabnam Nassimi is with us. Welcome back as well to John Curtis, who joins us from Edinburgh, professor of politics at the University of Strathclyde. And in his latest documentary, filmmaker Simon Koss spent time with a fisherman. You hitched a ride from Brittany aboard a French fishing trawler bound for Cornwall. You spoke with all sides.
Yeah.
The French, the British, the fishermen, the canners. Let's take a look.
Since 1983, we've had to cut our fleets more than the rest of Europe because we gave in our proper figures and they played the game, they lied.
The worst case scenario is that we will be catching fish, bringing it into Newlyn and not be able to sell it. And that could be absolutely disastrous.
So I'm not particularly worried. We hold all of the cards fishing. And it's not a boast, it's not a threat, it's just a reality. Do a deal, because no deal will be very bad for fishing for the other member states. For us, no deal is good. For fishing, no deal is a good situation.
Mais qui vient d'empêcher nous ce poisson? Il n'y a pas de poisson empêché si nous on ne vient pas, les Anglais ne viennent pas.
Pour l'instant, on ne sait pas trop quelle sauce on va être mangée, de toute façon, donc on attend quoi.
Yeah, we hold all of the cards, says that one fisherman.
Yeah, he was very, very confident.
When did you speak to him?
We met him for the first time in spring 2018, and then we carried on working with him up until autumn last year. So the last meeting where we got.
So this is incredible. It's been 3 years since the referendum. Here we are facing the abyss, if you will, and he's fine with no deal.
Oh yeah, more than fine. I mean, he was actually. I mean, he was trying to be conciliatory and say we'd like to make a deal, but he very clearly said, as you saw in the film, for him, no deal would be better. He wasn't the. There were other people. The woman you can see on the screen earlier on. She has a fleet of boats. She was much more worried. But the guy that we spoke to, Dave, he felt that they would be in a better position because then British fishermen would have sole access to British waters in that case. And would then be able to sell their fish where they wanted it. The problem that other people brought up with his argument was that the biggest market for British fish at the moment remains the EU. And if EU boats are banned from British waters, that would obviously there'd be a knock-on effect, a tit-for-tat problems for UK fishermen selling into Europe, and that was the real paradox.
The UK was always seen from here as this land of moderation when you looked at politics. We were really surprised by the vitriol during the Brexit campaign. Does it seem to you when you were shooting that documentary that 3 years on, that vitriol is still there?
Well, actually, it was interesting. I went with exactly that idea in mind. I'd made a previous film in 2016 about Brexit and came across a bit of the vitriol. But actually, talking to Dave during the film, he wasn't vitriolic. I mean, he was very clear about what he was defending. But at the end of the film, he actually was prepared to come over to France and meet his opposite numbers in France and talk to them. And to try and find some sort of agreement. So we were actually surprised that the people were on both sides. When you actually get down and talk to them, and you move a bit away from the kind of psychosis that you have in London and around Brexit, that on the ground, people were much more willing to talk and listen. I mean, very clearly, both sides had very strongly held opinions, but. I made the film with a French colleague. There were two of us, and he never faced any animosity at all when we were in Cornwall. People were extremely kind, extremely welcoming, but also very clear about the injustice that they felt when it came to the way the EU fisheries rules disadvantaged them.
You told us in part one of our discussion, John Curtis, how many of the members of the Conservative Party who will be voting for their next leader are fine with no deal. How about when it comes to the broader public? Is Dave the fisherman an outlier?
He's not an outlier, but he's not typical either. I mean, basically, the UK is still split roughly 50-50 between those who want to leave the European Union and those who wish to remain. And amongst those who are on the leave side, consistently polling suggests that amongst the general public, around a half of Leave voters are in favour of leaving without a deal, and probably 2/3 of them at least would find no deal acceptable, and they would certainly find it more acceptable than us having another referendum and changing our mind. So you shouldn't underestimate the width of the support for leaving without a deal, although at the end of the day, most of the polling evidence suggests it is still only a minority preference, but it is a preference of a very substantial minority of the public.
All right, lots of reactions to our discussion on the hashtag F24debate. Damien saying the only candidate that would now get my vote is Boris Johnson. He's the only person that can and will deliver Brexit. In the end, it'll be the current Foreign Secretary against his predecessor. Jeremy Hunt was doorstepped by reporters before the vote this Thursday morning.
Not quite sure if it's like the morning before my wedding, but it feels like a lot of big things are going to change today. And the question for the Conservative Party in the country is looking at Boris Johnson, is there a better alternative? And I'm someone who set up their own business. I want to turbocharge the British economy. I'm the Foreign Secretary who is fed up with us being pitted around the world for Brexit paralysis. I want to sort that out and walk tall in the world.
Now, when you think about this issue of deal or no deal with the European Union, how many do you think within the Conservative Party will give the lesser-known Jeremy Hunt a second look?
I think he's going to come of the two second, quite clearly. The thing is that no candidate, indeed no one person, has set out a very precise plan for how to cope with this. And until we have such plans, we won't have anything really to choose on. We're choosing on personality, as John Curtis said, on charisma, on popularity. We spoke earlier of uniting the country. You can't unite the country. As we've heard, it is split. There will be no unification of the country before Brexit is dealt with. So everything comes back to the details of a Brexit plan. We don't have any yet. We can hope that one or other might come up with one. Maybe behind the scenes they could put their heads together and come up with one together.
How far should the winner go to trying to avert a no-deal Brexit in your personal view?
Well, the problem is it's not just our choice. It also depends on the European Union. And they may firstly be in favour of just letting no deal happen out of frustration, or they may wish to try and impose very severe conditions, which they've spoken of already, like forcing the UK to hold an election or hold another referendum. I mean, forcing in the sense of saying we will only grant an extension if it is for a precise plan of that sort. So it's not as if what's going to happen...
You really think the EU will ask the UK to stage an election?
Well, it's not so much that they will ask, but they will expect something concrete in a plan of that kind. And if they don't get it, then they will not accede to the demand for an extension. I mean, what I'm saying is that this is not something that is purely under the control of the next Prime Minister of the UK.
All right. Theresa May called a snap election, you'll recall, in 2017. The next election is not scheduled till 2022. She found herself 10 votes shy of a majority, beholden to the support of the Ulster Unionist DUP party. There's a chance, Shabnam Nazimi, that whatever happens, because, as John Curtis said at the outset, Parliament is against a no-deal Brexit, that Boris Johnson will lose a vote of no confidence. Will he then be the best man to lead the Conservatives in a general election?
Well, first of all, I think in no situation would anyone want to leave, any British citizen or politician would want to leave with a no deal, leave the European Union with a no deal. However, I think when it comes to the last resort, when we know that there is no other possible solution to this, we will need to leave with a no deal. The only thing, as the other panel speakers have wisely mentioned, is we need to have a plan. And at the present, there isn't a plan in place. What we can only rely on is trusting on their track record, their past track record as Foreign Secretary, as Mayor of London, as other cabinet positions, in what they've been able to achieve and how they've been able to do it. In terms of Boris Johnson as the right candidate, if a general election is called, I do think he is. He is a liberal politician, an open-hearted, visionary politician, whilst there are some who are trying to start a cultural war based on some words that he's used previously, and claiming that he isn't a people's prime minister or leader. I oppose that view, because his stance, his vision as pro-immigration, be the first one of the first politicians to back. Sorry, my apologies. Gay marriage and etc. So I think he is incredibly liberal, and he will be able to reach one of the marginalised and hard to reach groups.
Beyond just party lines. Now,
yes.
You're saying, and both of you have said that neither of the candidates have spelled out a precise vision of how for when it comes to the plans for delivering Brexit. Now, there's one man who's got a precise vision, which is, well, don't do anything, just wait for October 31st to happen. His name is Nigel Farage. His Brexit party barreling past the Conservatives in recent European elections. The former UKIP leader telling an event hosted by the Daily Telegraph that if Johnson sticks by his guns, and sticks to that October 31st deadline, Farage says, I'm ready for a cross-party deal.
And if Boris did that, and he was prepared to go to the House of Commons, to be voted down, to lose a motion of confidence, to go to the country in a general election on that ticket, and with the support of people like me, he would win a massive, thumping majority.
And you would support him?
Yes, of course. Of course.
First of all, Shabnam Nassimi, would you see an eventual coalition between the Brexit Party and the Conservatives?
I don't think so, no. But what I do see and hear from his words is that Boris is the right candidate to be able to win back our Farage Tories and vanquish the Brexit Party. Boris is the only candidate that can threaten the Brexit Party and their agenda. So I don't think there would be a coalition government, but I do believe that Boris is a threat to these other groups that have been political groups that have been formed, and he is the right candidate to be able to attract back the Conservative members that have been frustrated because of Brexit and have moved on and voted for other parties.
So, John Curtis, give it to us straight. If there was a general election tomorrow in the United Kingdom, how would it look?
Very messy is the answer to that. At the moment, the polls on average put Labour ahead, but just on 24%. The Brexit Party's running second at about 22%. The Tories on 20%. And the Liberal Democrats on 17%. Almost inevitably, if you get anything like that kind of result, you'd end up with another House of Commons in which no party had an overall majority, and probably no party very close to an overall majority. Labour Party, however, probably would be the largest party, but it would be reliant on parties like the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish National Party north of the border to be able to form an administration, and it would therefore find itself in a not dissimilar position to the one in which Theresa May has found herself recently, i.e. a party that's reliant on smaller parties who have very clear views about Brexit. Both the SNP and the Liberal Democrats are in favour of a second referendum. Jeremy Corbyn seems to be moving in that direction, but very, very slowly. And there might well be a question mark about even if he were to become a leader of a minority administration and he were to try to go for a second referendum, whether the votes will be there in the House of Commons, because not all Labour MPs are very keen on the idea. So we could, frankly, as a result of general election, simply find ourselves in exactly the same place with a minority administration that is unable to resolve the Brexit impasse.
And just briefly, to be clear on that, John, you read out those poll numbers for us, but Britain has this first past the post system that favors the two major parties. Yep. Are you saying smaller ones like the Brexit Party would pick up a lot of seats?
Yes, well, certainly if the Brexit Party is running at 22%, then certainly they would be expected to pick up quite a lot of seats. Indeed, they might end up with more seats than the Conservatives. But undoubtedly, as one of your other contributors already said, one of the biggest attractions that Boris Johnson has for the Conservative Party at the moment is that when people are asked what might you do if any of the candidates were to become leader of the Conservative Party, Jeremy Hunt doesn't make any difference to the Brexit Party numbers. In contrast, Boris Johnson does. Around half of those people who currently say they'd vote for the Brexit Party say they'd switch back to the Conservatives if Boris Johnson becomes leader. Well, we'll wait and see what happens. That probably exaggerates his impact, but we can certainly expect the Brexit Party to fall back. But that said, we now have to remember that in the wake of the European Parliament elections, because the Brexit Party has a very clear stance on Brexit, those who want to leave and they're very keen on leaving have a very strong reason for voting for it. And equally on the other side, because the Labour Party still isn't clearly in favour of a second referendum, those on the Remain side have a very strong incentive to vote for the Liberal Democrats. And therefore don't assume that our first past the post system is necessarily going to end up squeezing the alternative parties. After all, in Scotland, from where I am speaking, neither the Conservatives nor Labour Party are very strong these days. The SNP dominates north of the border.
All right, these parties that are big tents that have different factions are having a hard time on both sides of the channel. Here in France, the big center-right bloc that traces its origins to de Gaulle, Chirac, and Sarkozy The Républicain Party faces an unprecedented crisis. Its leader, Laurent Wauquiez, resigning after his party scored a paltry 8% in last month's European elections. A cautionary tale, Jeremy Stubbs. How do you explain it? These parties that were parties of power reduced to 8%.
Well, there is a cautionary tale there indeed. And of course, in France, it's the Macron effect. We don't have anything like that. But it's certainly the case that Brexit has put the Conservative Party in a very, very difficult position. The success of the Brexit Party is really responsible for Boris Johnson's current success.
But in this country, we don't have Brexit, yet we've seen the Socialist Party reduced to tatters, and now Les Républicains.
Well, the reason for that, of course, is that you've got a totally different system here. We don't even have the Gilets jaunes on the other hand, but Brexit is what's doing it for us. And I think that the Conservative Party, unless it can solve this problem, it will be in deep trouble for a long, long time to come.
Simon Coss?
I mean, I think what you're seeing partly through Brexit and also what we've seen here with the different movements that we've seen in France and across Europe is a general dissatisfaction with traditional politics and for all sorts of reasons. That's bringing up these new populist parties, and I think that's something the traditional parties are either going to have to deal with or they're going to disappear. I mean, the idea that parties have a right to exist, some kind of innate right to exist, I think has been, both the traditional centre-right coalition that you referred to and the Socialist Party here in France have been clobbered over the last few years. We've seen the same thing happening, frankly, with Labour and the Conservatives in the UK. I think parties who were just sitting there saying, we have a right to be the majority because we always have been, are learning that if they're not in phase with the people, they're in trouble. And ironically, I think Brexit's a very European problem. I mean, it's these kinds of issues that we're seeing in the UK are coming up all over Europe. We've seen it in France. I mean, more extreme versions in Italy, in Hungary. A general dissatisfaction with the kind of classic version of politics that we've seen certainly in the post-war years. Is kind of coming up right across Europe. So.
John Curtis, what lessons do you draw from what you see on the continent?
Well, I mean, certainly, I think that we should regard Brexit as part of a wider debate about our attitudes towards international financial capitalism. International financial capitalism has two issues that many voters find difficult. One is that it's not delivered much in the way of increased living standards for large sections of the population. And secondly, it has been associated with large migratory flows. Now, the migration issue in the UK is different from that in much of continental Europe, but it's still a question of migration that causes a great deal of concern. So, I think, there is a wider debate here about whether or not the classic social democratic compromise, which was basically we allow capitalism to operate, but then we will succeed in redistributing its proceeds in a way that's relatively equitable. Social democratic parties have been finding it increasingly difficult to convince people of that message. And meanwhile, the concern about immigration, which is partly economic and partly cultural, has provided a backdrop in many a country for more populist parties to have a relatively successful platform.
All right, John Curtis, many thanks for joining us from Edinburgh. I want to thank Shabnam Nassimi for being with us from London, Jeremy Stubbs, Simon Coss. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. Quick look at reactions on social media to everything that's going on. Across the channel, the live blogs of various news websites have been tracking reactions as they come in. The candidates themselves have been tweeting. Boris Johnson, I'm deeply honoured to have secured more than 50% of the vote in the final ballot. Thank you to everyone for your support. I look forward to getting out across the UK, etc., etc. So just acknowledging that he's pretty well placed. Jeremy Hunt, admitting that he's the underdog, but in politics surprises can happen, as they did today. I do not doubt the responsibility on my shoulders to show my party how we deliver Brexit and not an election, but also a turbocharged economy, etc. So they're all sort of reacting to the results. Michael Gove saying that he's naturally disappointed, but proud of the campaign that we ran and thanking his team. There are various other elements being kind of plucked from Twitter by The Guardian's live blog and others. This is Pippa Crerar of the Mirror newspaper. She's kind of looking into vote distribution.
This was my question, because
some people,
Boris got 157 the previous round, he only got 160.
Right, so some people were sort of perhaps without enough evidence saying what's going on here, maybe even vote rigging. The Guardian's comment on that is vote rigging is absolutely not the right word. Getting your supporters to vote in such a way as to deliver the required result is more akin to tactical voting than vote rigging. So obviously people getting into the mechanics of all of that.
And throwing in a bit of conspiracy.
That's right. Others saying, look, this was just a campaign well ran and well organised, and people kind of showing the extent of how it all kind of played out, if you like, and saying it was well done. George Parker here of the Financial Times saying that if you were Gavin Williamson, you couldn't have invented a more perfect result. Boris Johnson wins over half of Tory MPs, so obviously everybody really seeing this as a case, as this headline says, can anything stop him from becoming Prime Minister? There will be a TV debate. ITV has just announced that there will be a head-to-head between the two final candidates on the 9th of July, and that, of course, after this week's debate between the candidates before it was whittled down, elegantly described by John Crace of The Guardian as what was it? Aging boy man take twat. Anyway, there was a certain amount of satire going on about that particular contest. I suppose many people really feeling that Boris Johnson has it in the bag. A lot of speculation about that online, unless he throws it away by saying or doing something really bizarre in the meantime. So the usual criticisms of Boris Johnson about maybe fudging his language or quite a bit of newspeak, etc. Could that sink him? Probably not, is the answer to that. But of course, every day has its new revelation about that. There was, at that debate, The Sun has come out today with the fact that his mic was left open afterwards, and the date that he said he will set for Brexit, which is October the 31st, he was overheard afterwards saying to the other candidates, see, we don't agree on that much. And Michael Gove immediately said the dates, we do disagree on the dates. And Boris Johnson said, oh, not really, Pa. So there's been a fair bit of analysis about how he's telling different people different things, if you like, which I suppose you could say, if you have to then go and negotiate, is not entirely stupid, because you can't put all your cards on the table. But people are lacking in trust, I suppose, of his language and his communications. But that's not new.
Okay, many thanks for that, James Creedon. We shall see. It's going to play out over the next month, the party leadership, and then we'll have to see what the House of Commons thinks about it all. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.